Today's horror story is written by A Mysterious Lurker. I work as a private investigator, and it's not at all as glamorous as you would think. Nearly all of my cases involve spying on cheating spouses. I'm the only PI in the area, so if you have a cheating spouse, I'm the only real option. I've never helped police on a case and figured that was something movies and books made up. I've done 2 missing person cases because the families were so desperate for leads. In the end, I didn't find anything useful, so I didn't charge them for my time. I sent the cases off to other private investigators a few cities away. They also came up empty, even with the police connections, and that made me feel slightly less useless. In short, my career has been pitiful. Nothing interesting has ever happened. I felt as if I would be stuck with cheating cases until I died. Then, I met him. I was sitting in my car waiting for a couple to come out of a motel. I'd gotten shots of the husband and the side piece. Now I just needed a time-stamped photo of them leaving. It was boring work, and I normally played audiobooks or podcasts while I waited. A tapping on my window startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone to come up to my car. It happened from time to time in the rougher parts of town. But the person who was trying to get my attention wasn't begging for change. He was dressed in a suit. Unable to figure out who the hell he was, I rolled down my window while keeping an eye on the motel. "You're Skyler West, correct? I am here to ask for your assistance." He flashed an official-looking badge. His voice was monotone and emotionless. Overall, I got a weird vibe from him. He was dressed in a suit, but his hair color was unnatural. A strange orange, verging on pink in the right light, and it was long enough to be pulled back into a small ponytail. He couldn't be a detective or any kind of job in law enforcement with hair dyed like that. Also, instead of calling, he approached my car. Not my office, but he cornered me on a job. "I didn't catch your name or your creds. You flashed your badge too fast," I commented, leaning out of the window. He paused while placing the badge back inside his suit pocket, unaware of how quickly he showed it. His eyes creeped me out. They were dark and as emotionless as his voice. "I apologize. I am Nicholas Flint. I work as a government agent. However, this job I am approaching you about is more of a personal issue." He commented and let me look at his badge for as long as I wanted. It looked official, but fakes nowadays did look pretty real. If the job he wanted me to look at was personal, it explained why he tracked me down. Most likely he didn't want to get caught being seen going to my office or have my number on his call logs. Finding my car was easier than finding a payphone in the age of cell phones. I should have been more suspicious of him, but he gave off such a neutral vibe I trusted him enough to at least hear what he had came here for. "All right, Nicky, come on in and talk before you blow my cover," I commented while gesturing to my passenger seat. He paused again, looking as if he'd never been called by a nickname before and was confused over who Nicky was. Before he got into my car, he took a small notebook out of his pocket and wrote something down and snapped it shut. I wondered what that was all about, but didn't ask. He got into the car and wasted no time telling me the reason why he was here. Janet Gates disappeared yesterday while walking down a hiking trail with her friends and pulled out a photo of a girl no older than 10. "She looks pretty young. Why aren't the cops involved?" "Why would you be asking me for help?" I asked, handing the photo back. "She's my niece. Due to her parents' rocky relationship, the police are set on the theory her father took her from the trail and is hiding where she is. I do not believe that is the case. It has only been a day, but so far there are no solid plans to search the woods further." He explained, but still used the same emotionless tone while talking about a missing family member. I thought about the small amount of information I had received so far. Jenna and Nick looked nothing alike, which was understandable. She was his niece, and there could be a few reasons why there wasn't any family resemblance. The cold way of speaking could just be how he was, or he pushed his emotions down to deal with the case. Something still felt very odd about the entire thing. "So, what? You're asking me for help because you're her family and can't work the case? Is that it? I asked, eyebrow raised. Correct. I cannot be on this case. You are the only private detective in this city. There are others more experienced with cases such as this. However, they are too far away. I would like to start looking for her tonight if possible. I do not care about finding the one responsible for her disappearance. I only want to find the girl safe. He explained while staring forwards. I let what he said sink in. I wasn't convinced that the girl was his niece, but why lie about something like that? Questions ran through my mind over the stranger that I invited into my car. My phone pinged and I checked it on reflex. Nick stayed silent as I opened my email to see a notice from my bank. My heart was fluttering, thinking what I was seeing was a mistake. $2,000 was just deposited into my account from a company I'd never even seen before. I looked over at the agent in my car. His face was impossible to read. I arranged for payment for this case. That deposit was for your time hearing me out. You shall be paid more if you accept my request, even if this girl is found or not. I just require your assistance while searching for her. The agent said, and I felt myself sweating. This didn't make sense. Who had this kind of money to toss around? Was he trying to lure me out to sell me into human trafficking or steal my organs? Why give me $2,000 to get me to go into the woods? I might be a private detective, but that didn't mean I could see through his suspicious actions. Suddenly, the agent slouched in his seat, looking nervous as if he was spotted. I looked over to the motel to see the cheating husband come out, and I snapped a few photos of him kissing someone who was not his wife. At least that job was wrapped up. Nicholas stayed hunkered down in his seat, looking slightly worried. It was good to know he could express some emotions. "What are you doing?" I asked after finishing taking the photos I needed. "You said not to blow your cover," he answered innocently. The promise of more money in my account and his reaction was what sealed the deal. This guy didn't appear to be someone with a nefarious plot. I decided to trust him and take the job, praying it wasn't a mistake. "Where do you want me to meet you tonight?" The next few minutes was him telling me when and where we should meet. Once the details were clear, he got out of the car and looked both ways before crossing the road and out of sight. I knew I could trust this guy, but wondered what the hell I had just gotten myself into. I met Nicholas at the start of a local hiking trail at 6 p.m. that night. I was wearing comfy shoes for the trek. He was still in his suit and polished shoes. "Are you going hiking in a suit and tie, Nicky?" I asked, looking him over. He didn't even have a bottle of water. He, again, looked confused and took out his notebook again to jot something down. Snapping it shut, he nodded. "I work a lot and do not own that much casual clothing," he replied. I wondered if he slept in a suit, but kept that to myself. I started along the trail with him close behind. I kept my eyes open, but didn't know what we were looking for. Having a dog to track down the scent would be nice. I've never been part of a search party in the woods and doubted this trip would result in anything but wasted time. "I don't know what we're going to find out here that the cops can't. I don't know anything about tracking. I feel as if you're wasting your money," I said as we walked. The police are not focusing their efforts on this trail. The fact that we are out here looking means something. Effort is never wasted. I wanted to argue, but stayed silent. He was paying me a lot for a simple hike. We arrived where Jenna was seen last, and I took a sip of my water. We both stopped to look around, hoping we would find something. It was only a few minutes from the start of the trail, and one would assume this place was safe. But something happened to that little girl. I looked along the edge and the bushes, trying to see if anything was disturbed or any obvious drag marks. But Jenna was small. A grown adult could just pick her up and run off with her. The lack of broken twigs and flattened bushes meant nothing. I still felt the entire trip was useless, but something caught my eye. Tied to a tree, about 2 steps off the trail was something catching the light. I walked over to it and found it was a piece of candy with a foil wrapping hanging from a branch with some fishing line. It was low enough for a child to reach it. My blood turned cold, wondering how the hell the cops missed this. Unless they didn't. If Jenna saw this, she might have taken the candy and the person who lured her away could have come overnight and set up the trap again. But why set it in the same spot, risking the police seeing it? "I think I have something," I yelled over to Nicholas. He quickly walked over to me, but neither of us touched the hanging candy. "Do you see any more?" he asked, and I didn't even consider looking for another piece. I scanned the trees, and in a few seconds saw another twinkle of foil moving in the breeze. Nicholas pulled out a set of gloves so he could carefully look over the piece we had already found. It was just a bright pink-colored wrapping, with no name brand printed on it. Was it homemade? He left it where it was and nodded to where I spotted the next piece. "We should follow the trail," he said, and I shook my head. "Shouldn't we call the cops?" I offered. "Not just yet. I doubt they are going to take 2 pieces of candy hanging from trees seriously, unless we find something solid to take their focus from Jenna's father. They won't pay us any attention." "Shouldn't the police follow up every lead? Come on, this is weird. It's something," I commented, sounding frustrated. The agent paused, thinking about something. With his blank slate of a face, it was hard to tell if the gears were turning in his head or not. Finally, he decided on giving me some information he held back. The local police had a vendetta against Jenna's father. He was able to walk off a charge of drunk driving. The woman he nearly killed is related to the chief of police. The drunk driving was the reason why Jenna's parents split up. Beforehand, he made threats and broke down their front door in a drunken rage. Everyone was convinced it was only a matter of time before he snapped and killed his family. The police had plenty of reasons to think he harmed his daughter, but I fear this case is more personal. The chief may only care about making that man's life a living hell instead of finding Jenna. It is possible they are not searching the woods in fear they find something that proves the father is not at fault. "But that's..." I started not believing what I was hearing. "They're risking a little girl's life over something like that?" I believe the chief does not care about his career, let alone a little girl he has no relation to. Keep in mind this is only a theory based on the actions of the police. I have no way of proving any of this. The only thing that is for certain is the police will not put the manpower into searching these woods unless a lead they cannot ignore is brought to light. My teeth clenched together in frustration. I regretted how inexperienced I was. I didn't have any kind of connections I could call to help. Only a guy that provided some computer work and camera setup when needed. If I was a real private investigator, I could have had a bunch of people over here combing these woods for clues. I felt useless trying to find this girl. Nicholas was an agent but was unable to bring in the big guns. Jenna had the bad luck of having a father who already wore a target on his back. If she wasn't taken by him, we were the only ones really looking for her. Nicholas noticed my shifted mood and spoke. "We have already found a possible lead. Even without the same resources as the police, there is a chance to find something. If we press on, we could find something better than 2 hanging candies." I nodded. He was right. At least we were searching for her. We continued on, not touching the candies and leaving them for the police to collect as evidence, if they listened. Plus, they doubled as a trail back to the hiking path. I didn't know about Nicholas, but I was useless in the woods. I could get lost easily without something guiding us back. The agent followed behind me as I scanned the trees, looking for more candies, but also any sign of the girl. Every time I thought we lost the trail, I would notice a twinkling off in the distance. If Jenna was following these, why would she go alone? Wasn't she with friends? I asked when the thought came up. She had a small disagreement with her friends. She was lagging behind because she was angry with them. It is possible she went off because the trail of candies was more interesting, but I cannot say for certain, Nicholas replied. I wondered more about this trail we followed. Was someone just waiting the entire day, hoping by chance someone went off the trail? It was not guaranteed that a victim would follow the candies deep into the woods. And normally, people who snatched children had preferences. Was Jenna really that unlucky to be good enough for her kidnapper to think she was suitable? This reminds me of Hansel and Gretel, I said while we paused to look for another flash of color in the trees. I looked over my shoulder, expecting Nicholas to agree, but he looked at me with such a blank expression on his face that it made me think he had never heard the fairy tale before. Slowly, he took out his notebook, ready to write something down. This full-grown man really never heard that tale and expected me to tell him. I gave him an abridged version while he made notes, snapping his small notebook shut. He followed my footsteps towards another hanging treat. I don't understand the moral of the story. Don't these tales normally have one? Was there not a better way of dealing with their situation besides dooming their children by leaving them in the woods? He asked, and I didn't have answers for him. It's just an old fairy tale. I don't think having a moral is the point of it, and maybe leaving your kids to be eaten by bears made sense back then, I said with a shrug. As we walked, we traveled deeper into the forest. I brought along a flashlight so we could keep searching until dark if needed. A hopeless feeling came creeping into my gut as I thought of hundreds of different outcomes Jenna could have faced. If she wasn't at the end of this trail, then what? We couldn't search this entire forest. I don't feel as if we're doing much. What if this isn't the right path? What if someone took her or this has nothing to do with her? Nicholas stayed silent to let me take a drink of water. Again, he refused my offering of some. I was sweating in the warm spring night. I didn't know how he was staying so cool hiking in the woods in a suit. It is possible that someone took her off the trail, or she lost her way and is hurt somewhere waiting for someone to find her. We lack the resources to fully disprove all theories of where Jenna may be. Right now, we can only see what is at the end of this trail, and if it leads to her or not. At the very least, we are eliminating one possibility out of many. I felt annoyed that I didn't think of that obvious thing. Of course, we could only do what was within our power. Finding a dead end meant one less lead to chase, and focusing on other ideas. I assumed Nicholas would be upset working with a novice like myself. I felt overwhelmed so quickly because his case was so different from the ones I normally took on. He did not look upset in the slightest. Only a bit glad he could convince someone to look in the woods with him. Jenna isn't your niece, is she? I asked, risking the question. The way he talked about her felt distant. I doubted it from the start and wondered why he would lie. He didn't need to say she was related to him to have a reason to look for a little girl. No, I apologize for the lie. In truth, I cannot rely on the police in this area, and there are no other agents to spare on such a minor case. I assumed you would be suspicious of my request, so I decided to give myself more of a trustworthy reason to find the girl. I was wary of him letting me lead me into the woods, but I felt as if this guy was a decent person. I only hoped my gut didn't prove me wrong. Getting back to the case, I looked at the hanging candy off in the distance. I guess I could trust Nicholas, but what was waiting for us at the end of the trail? Was it just a prank, or would we come across someone dangerous? Do you have a weapon at least? I asked, and he nodded. I didn't see a holster on his small frame, but believed he was armed. I, for a few different reasons, didn't own a gun. Sure, I was a private detective, but never took on a case that required one until that day. Overall, I disliked them, and I had lousy aim the few times I went to a shooting range to practice. If I got out of these woods safely, I may change my idea about owning a handgun. Let's keep going and figure out if this trail means anything. The agent followed behind with a nod. If he was the one armed, you would think he would offer to take the lead. I was the one spotting hanging candies, and from that I assumed I had better eyesight, which made me nervous. Would he be able to shoot a person at a distance if needed? Would it come to that? The answer came when we reached the end of the candy trail. It was an answer I never would have expected. Although it was the most obvious one, as I even commented on it earlier. What would one expect to see at the end of a breadcrumb trail in the woods? A cabin made out of candy. We walked into a small clearing to see a newly built wood cabin in the middle. No paths led to it. It made me wonder how anyone got the materials out in the middle of the woods and through the trees without leaving a trace behind. "I'll take the lead," Nicholas said, finally stepping in front. I followed behind, hyper aware of any noise or lack of noise from the woods. The lights inside the cabin were not on, leaving the windows dark. Nicholas crept up the stairs and it sounded more of a hollow sound compared to the creaking wood I would expect. He stopped at the door, hand on the handle. Here, I thought he would need a warrant to search it, but he looked as if he no longer cared about the legal process. When he commented about only wanting to find Jenna, he meant it. I didn't know if I should be right behind him, so I stayed on the first step. Instead of opening the door, he stopped with the handle in his hand. "Skyler, you said in that tale the cabin was made out of sweets, correct?" he asked, not looking in my direction. I looked over the normal-looking cabin, trying to understand his point. Nicholas snapped off the handle, causing me to stop mid-question. He raised it so I could see the broken piece, my mind not understanding what I was looking at. Instead of the metal the handle should be, it was a light brown. Walking over, he placed the broken handle in my hand. Without warning, he then kicked the railing hard enough to send parts of it flying. It did not splinter like wood, but rather cracked and crumbled. I jumped at the destruction, but I still didn't believe what I was seeing. Digging a fingernail into the handle, I took a small piece off and tasted it, confirming my suspicions. "It's chocolate?" I asked, dumbfounded. The railing was painted gingerbread, it seems. I assume the rest of the porch is either the same or painted chocolate, Nicholas confirmed. That couldn't be it. This was far too strange. Who the hell would build a realistic cabin out of gingerbread and chocolate? The windows looked like glass, but could be made of sugar. Hell, who could afford such a joke? I was shaking my head trying to figure out what we just walked into. "Stay behind me. I'm going to kick down the door." Nicholas didn't appear to be fazed by the odd turn of events in the slightest. "Wait, what? Aren't you wondering who the hell made this?" I asked, watching him walk up the steps. "My working theory is a witch with a bad sense of humor," he said, his usual monotone voice making it impossible to tell if he was joking. I was unable to respond as he raised a shoe, now dirty from his walk in the woods, and kicked the door to pieces. He went inside the dark cabin, and I dropped the fake handle to go after him. I took my flashlight out to look inside, and I wished I hadn't. It was empty, aside from 4 piles of what looked to be slime on the far side of the room. Nicholas swiftly made his way over to the smaller pile. This was some X-Files crap, and he was acting as if everything was perfectly normal. I followed behind, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom of the cabin. It landed on one pile of stiff, transparent goop. My body jerked back in reflex, and I fell to the floor hard enough for one hand to break through the chocolate board. Inside the pile of goo was a skeleton. One with enough muscle on the bones and eyes remaining to make me sick. I quickly scanned the other piles to see more bodies, one in each at different stages of decomposition. The last pile, the one Nicholas made a beeline for, was what I feared I would see. Jenna, curled up in the slime, looking unharmed. I started, my throat closing up from tears. I blinked them away, knowing now was not the time to lose it. Nicholas tossed aside his suit jacket with no hesitation. He plunged his arms elbow deep in the mysterious substance and pulled the small girl out. It made an awful noise as her body was released, but the slime did not stick to her. He placed an ear against her chest while taking a pulse. But was she really alive? Unless we arrived a minute after she was placed inside that slime, how could she still be? She's fine. Still breathing, but we need to get her some treatment. Please carry her so my hands are free to fight whatever did this. Unfortunately, we cannot take the others out. My head was swimming from his words. With a shaking hand, I brought my flashlight over to the almost skeleton trapped in slime. The remaining eyes flickered and moved in the skull. I screamed, darting back and dropping the flashlight. It was impossible, but the others inside the piles of slime were still alive. Almost down to bones, but still aware of what was happening. I dry-heaved over the thought. If Nicholas didn't snap me out of my state, I doubt we would have gotten out of that cabin without me losing a part of myself. Skyler, we need to get her home. His tone was gentle and the kindest I've heard him sound so far. I nodded, squeezing my eyes shut, forcing the important matters to the front of my mind. No matter how impossible, confusing, or horrifying everything was, the only thing that mattered was getting Jenna out of those woods. I opened my eyes, now focused on the task at hand. Picking up the flashlight, I put it away. Then I picked up Jenna. Her small body felt far too light, but she was still warm instead of the cold corpse I thought she was when we arrived. I'll ask a shit ton of questions after all of this, I told Nicholas. I'll answer everything, he confirmed. Without anything else to say to each other, I started to get out of the cabin. I needed to pace myself. No matter how much I wanted to run, I was carrying extra weight, and I needed to be careful not to exhaust myself right off the bat. Being so focused getting down the stairs, I didn't hear Nicholas shouting my name. Turning, a blur of motion blocked my view of the agent. I held Jenna closer to protect her from whatever came between myself and the other man. The figure was covered in rags and tangled hair flowing out. Over the newcomer's shoulder, I saw Nicholas reach for his waist. When he took his jacket off, I didn't see a holster, but I hoped he had a weapon hidden. The figure that ran between us was faster than him. I nearly tripped down the stairs as I watched in horror, unable to do anything to help him. The monster thrust out a clawed hand directly into the agent's stomach, staining his white shirt with blood. His body slammed against the gingerbread boards, cracking them. The figure didn't turn to face in my direction yet, so I did not see what attacked. Instead, I saw Nicholas's pale face. Run. His request was barely above a whisper. The creature clutched the claw still deep in his chest and used the body to take out the walls of the cabin, dragging Nicholas into that dark place full of nightmares. Nicholas bought us some time. I did not wait to watch what else the creature did to him. I did as he wanted and ran as fast as my legs would carry me and the still sleeping Jenna. While I ran, nearly out of my mind in fear, a cackling laugh echoed through the woods. In the back of my mind, a part of myself thought the laughing sounded like a witch. I ran until my legs could no longer move. I stopped against a tree, panting with sweat dripping down my face. Adjusting Jenna in my arms, I gave her a quick check over to see if she was still all right. Just asleep and looking perfectly fine. My arms ached from carrying her, but I refused to set her down. Instead, I awkwardly placed her on my back, hoping the change in how I carried her would help my arms. I needed to keep going. The sun was setting and I was hopelessly lost. No hanging candy in sight. Still, no matter how desperate the situation felt, I could not give up on getting this girl back home. It was the last thing Nicholas wanted. I felt a pang of guilt through my chest. The thing that attacked the agent wasn't human. I knew that. Still, I felt as if I should have done more. If I was the one attacked, he might have had more hope of getting Jenna out of these woods. If only he was here. But he wasn't. It was a fact I needed to accept. My breathing returned to normal, so I needed to keep going. Shifting Jenna a little, I stared back into the trees, listening in case I was followed. My heart jumped in my throat when I noticed a flash of color through the trees in the dimming light. I forced myself not to run over to the hanging candy I was positive I would never see again. I started to look for a second one, but paused to think. Was the trail of candies made by the creature that attacked Nicholas and took Jenna? Could I trust where they led? Did I even have any other choice but to follow them? My cell phone was in my pocket, but checking it, I found it useless. The screen flickered, making it impossible to check if I even had a signal. I suppose if what was after us could keep people alive as skeletons, it could easily mess with a cell phone. My brain still couldn't believe half of what I'd seen that day. However, I didn't need to believe it, I just needed to get the hell out of those woods. As night fell, I decided to follow the candy trail, hoping it was the right choice. When it became too dark to see, I took the flashlight out to guide my way while still keeping hold of the girl on my back. Every sound in the woods made me jump and scan the trees looking for the source. No moon shone, making the woods so dark I couldn't see anything beyond my beam of light. Grabbing a flashlight that day was a good idea. My water bottle stayed inside my bag because I didn't know how long I was going to be in the woods for. Every step, I hoped for the hiking trail, but deep down I knew I should be prepared to be lost for at least a night. Cursing myself, I realized I dumbly didn't tell anyone where I was going. If I didn't make it out of there, no one would be looking for me. But aside from my sister, who lived a state away, I didn't have anyone in my life to notice I was missing until after a few days. Walking along the dark woods, I feared I wouldn't find my way out every time I couldn't find the next hanging candy after a few minutes. Without my phone, I was unable to know how much time had passed, but my body felt like I'd walked for hours. A wind blew, rustling the leaves and also bringing a soft whisper to my ears. A voice from behind fluttered in the air so low I couldn't make out the words. When it came again, it was stronger and enough for me to hear what it was saying. "Give me the girl." Turning on my heel in a blind panic, I directed the beam of light into the trees where the voice came from. A dark figure stood in the distance, almost too far for me to see it. I heard the request again from a raspy, low voice from that figure watching us. When I didn't respond, it took a step closer as I took a step back. When the figure moved, pale arms extended from the rags it used as clothing. The arms became so long as it reached forwards, it could almost grab a hold of us. Instead, it took a step, and the creature's legs grew in the same way the arms did. Nearly stumbling to the ground, my legs refused to move as the monster changed from a small figure in the distance to a massive thing. As it grew, trees were pushed aside to make room for the giant pale body. A tangle of hair remained over the face, leaving only a twisted grin visible. Wrapping long fingers around two trees, it brought that horrible face as close as possible to me, rancid breath ruffling my clothing. "Give me the girl," it demanded again. Despite the creature's size, the voice was soft and low. "Fuck that!" Grabbing a fist-sized rock, I tossed it at the monster, knowing it wouldn't do anything. I then turned and ran again, refusing to face the monster that simply cackled in my response. The ground shook with the sound of the laughter, nearly making me lose my footing. The last thing Nicholas said went through my mind. I didn't think about the monster or where I was going. I just thought of that one word. Run. Hello friends, Baron here. My apologies, I did not intend to leave it on a cliffhanger. Such cruelty I reserve for the peasants. But the thrilling conclusion will be out very soon. Thank you for listening.